Hey everybody, Jake here, TrendSpider, to go over the weekend video update into the second half of February. And before I jump into the broad markets, crypto, and to some individual names, I did want to mention that we officially announced our new order routing tool, Signal Stack, this week. So Signal Stack is essentially an order routing tool that allows you to use TrendSpider or other third-party platforms like TradingView to essentially connect your TrendSpider and your TradingView or any other platform to your broker. So you can essentially automate your trades and create alerts with a webhook generated from Signal Stack. So you can essentially have an order execute when your alert goes off or a specific set of conditions go off. So essentially, this is a very big step for us to help automate your trading and make trading even more efficient. So you don't have to be in front of the screen all the time. So just go to signalstack.com and check that out. It's free to create an account, and you get 25 free signals up front when you sign up. So that means that you essentially get 25 free automated trades when you do sign up. So if you have any questions, just reach out to us on the Signal Stack Twitter account. So just at Signal Stack, or you can just reach out to us at hello@trendspider.com with any questions that you have. Really excited to finally get this out. It's been a long time coming. So let's jump into some individual names for the broad market, starting with SPY as always. We did have and we still have a pretty strong uptrend. I mean, this has been something that's been in the works for well over a month now. And we did break down through this trend zone here, pretty much gapped below it here on Friday today. But there's other names out there that are showing some pretty strong strength. So you definitely do still have a risk-on environment, especially if you look at Bitcoin and some of these other in the equities markets growth names. But you did have a little bit of a pullback here on SPY. One thing I'll mention here is this would be your classic SR flip. So if we are breaking down and we do have more downside left, it would make sense to at least retest this area and then continue down. We'll see what happens going into next week and see how everything's looking. But for now, we did break through this downtrending zone, or excuse me, this uptrend zone. So we'll see if we get a retest or this breakdown is invalidated if we get back over the top of this zone. So all in all, relatively strong hammer here on the daily chart to end the day. We are below the trend zone support, so keep that in mind going into next week. And definitely keep in mind that we are still having trouble getting through the all-time high anchored VWAP zone. So this is something that we've been looking at for multiple weeks when we're doing these videos, and we just have not been able to get above this all-time high VWAP zone. Now, I made a VWAP zone, so if we just show the VWAP, and shout out to Brian Shannon, who is really kind of the godfather of anchored VWAP and strategies around that. He actually just came out with a book as well. So if you want to check that out, definitely go to @AlphaTrends on Twitter and check out his new book. It's a ton of information about the anchored VWAP and pretty much everything you need to know about it. So definitely check out his book. Just came out a couple weeks ago, and really excited for him that that's finally out. So we will be going over, as I mentioned, the anchored VWAP here and how I use these offsets. So you can see here when I'm just using the anchored VWAP, this is essentially the volume weighted average price since the all-time highs. And you'll notice here that the price action did not really respect this perfectly, right? We had multiple times intra-week where we broke through it and actually closed above it too. So what I want to do is I want to add an offset to account for some of this price action that did kind of close above the anchored VWAP. So we know if we're getting a false signal or a false breakout or not. So you go right-click, go to Properties, and you just go to Percentage Bands. And this is where you really kind of have to plug and play here. We had a 2.5 here before, so I've already kind of plug and played here. And you can see here now, I'm taking into account these candle bodies that are above the anchored VWAP. And so now, we have this area that is really capturing price action that you can kind of say, all right, well, we're still not through the zone. If you're just using the anchored VWAP and just the VWAP itself, there's going to be some false signals here if you do get a close above the VWAP like we had about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. for the January 30th weekly candle. So until we can really close above the top of this offset, which is right around 420, and you also have a gap around 421 or so, that is really going to be the main thing. And this coincides right with that gap above. So really, if we can get a weekly close above this band, this 2.5% offset, as well as that gap, essentially from back in August, which is right here, this is going to be kind of the line in the sand that we need to get above to really continue up. So for now, as I mentioned, we are kind of have this little breakdown, maybe just a little breather in this uptrend that we've had since December. On the daily chart, you can see that. And then on the weekly chart, we definitely want to get above that all-time high VWAP zone. On the Qs, we pretty much have a very similar candle to what we had about a week ago. So on February 10th, you can see very similar kind of candle, doji type looking candle. And if we did continue down from here and broke this February 10th low, so pretty much right here, broke and closed below it, then this January 6th pivot VWAP would definitely be an area to watch. And at this point, that's right around 292.75. So definitely keep an eye for a break and a close below this February 10th low for more downside to test that January 6th pivot VWAP. And this is another thing that Brian Shannon teaches in his book, where to anchor VWAPs, why to anchor a VWAP at a specific spot. So there's a lot of questions, if you have them, that are answered in this book that Brian just released. So make sure to definitely check that out if you do want to apply anchored VWAP to your trading strategy. On the weekly chart, we do have the all-time high VWAP zone similar to what we had on SPY. Notice that we have not gotten to that point yet, so we're almost kind of like just consolidating here. We have an inside bar on the weekly candle inside of last week's candle or inside of last week's range, and we'll just see what happens. But all in all, we do have kind of the medium longer term breakout of this falling wedge still. Do we get an SR flip here as well, which is simply just a retest and then continuation up? We'll have to see, but as I've mentioned in multiple videos, it is very common to retest the zone that you broke out of. It doesn't always happen, but a lot of the time it does. So keep that in mind for the Qs. Now on IWM is looking pretty good. We actually had a green day here. We're getting really tight within the symmetrical triangle here. You can see that we've been trading within this range pretty much over the last 4 days. And so definitely will be interesting to see if we do get the breakout. You can see here on the weekly chart, the all-time high VWAP zone. We are, and this is a great example too, right? We actually closed above it on the week of January 30th, and then we had a pullback. So, for this, I would even reset this. So instead of about a 1.5% band, I would add 2% band. So we're not essentially getting a false signal next time we close. So now I added a 2% band to take into account this close here. So now we really need to close above the top of this band right around 196.75, 197 for really a true breakout, because this clearly was a false breakout here as we had a big move down after the week of January 30th. And now, we're pretty much sitting below that VWAP or right at that VWAP once again. So all in all, we have some work to do still here on IWM. Daily chart looks decent, but this is a symmetrical triangle. It's about as neutral as you can get. We are in an uptrend here with this symmetrical triangle, so that's something to consider. But until the daily closes above or below this setup, we really don't know the direction quite yet. But all in all, not a horrible weekly candle here. Also an inside bar for IWM's weekly candle too. Going into Bitcoin, which definitely is your risk on, risk off indicator, not only just for crypto, but for, the broad markets, the equities markets. So, I don't even trade crypto, but I look at Bitcoin all the time to get an idea of, is risk on, is risk off. This is a great tool to use to get an idea of, the sentiment in the markets and all of that, not just in crypto, but the broad markets as well and the equity side of things. Now, for the daily chart, you can see here on the left that we are pretty much just right at this previous pivot area. that we reversed at back in August, and now we're retesting that area. We pretty much rejected almost right at the August highs here, got a little above it, and now you can see we got a pretty healthy candle here for Friday. So if we do break above, let's say 25,344 on the daily candle, I think we could move up pretty quickly from here, possibly up to even the 30K mark, which is not only a psychological level, but it's also an important area on the supply and demand side. So if we anchor a volume by price, the volume by price tool here, essentially it's showing where has volume aggregated, where has volume transacted and occurred since the March 2022 highs. So you can see here that this is an important level on the VWAP zone to get above, and we're almost above it. And so that's something to consider on the weekly chart. If we get a weekly close above this VWAP zone, very bullish. And then you also have this volume gap. You don't have a lot of liquidity. You don't have a lot of participants that own Bitcoin since the March 2022 highs within this area. So it kind of creates almost like a vacuum for price to move quickly through, because you don't have a lot of friction, for price to move through until, you get to this little blip right around 30K. So, the next area where you've got shares above, not shares, just volume in general above, is right from around 29,400 up to around 30,400. So these blocks of volume here, these are people that bought a little early, back around 30K. So once you get back up to 30K, you're back to break even. You may take some off the table. You may take everything off the table. That adds to supply on the market, and that's how you can get kind of little pit stops here at these volume nodes after a big move through a volume gap. So all in all, pretty strong price action. Will be interesting to see how it does this weekend. Remember, the weekend is really a big kind of time for crypto, because you have a lot of people who maybe are trading the equities markets during the week, and then they go to crypto over the weekend. So we'll see if we can break through this, but definitely we want to see a weekly close above the top of this March 2022 high VWAP zone. And then same thing here, right around 25,300 on the daily candle, which is simply just previous horizontal level of resistance. So you've definitely got a confluence of basic horizontal support resistance levels, and then the VWAP zone from that March 22nd high, which could really give you a decent idea of direction if we can close above that on both the daily and the weekly charts. Going into Apple. This one is a little disappointing this week. We've had a very strong move to the upside pretty much since early January, so it wouldn't be shocking to see just in general price action to take a little bit of a breather. We did kind of have this ascending triangle forming, and we technically did gap down below the support zone, similar to what we saw in SPY. But still, we're just kind of trading within this range. I mean, if we just delete this in general and just draw a box, we're pretty much just trading in a very defined range right here. So until we can really get below the low here from February 3rd, the gap below is then in play. Your gap fills right around 146.61. Remember, if you do want to automate and just see gaps without having to search for them, use the gap detector on TrendSpider. You can see here we have a gap below, as I just mentioned, the one that fills around 146.61. But if we do break to the upside, we do have a gap above that fills right around 171.35, give or take a few cents. So remember, the gap detector is really nice if you don't want to have to go through and scan with your eyes to see, is that a gap? Is it not a gap? The gap detector will do all that work for you, and a really big time saver. One of my favorite tools on the platform by far, because I look at gaps all the time for targets to the upside, downside, all of that. So on the daily, as we mentioned, still in this range. We really need to break below around 148 or break above, let's call it this previous close here, right around 155.25. So those are kind of your parameters for your triggers for upside or downside. And then we'll see kind of what happens going into the week ahead. Who knows? Maybe we'll just chop around for another week. We'll just have to see. On the weekly chart, you can see here that we do have kind of a weird weekly candle here, kind of like an inverse hammer. I don't want to call it like a shooting star, because a lot of the time you want to see a shooting star kind of higher than all the previous price action. So here you can see it's kind of an inside bar shooting star to this big candle here from January 30th. So Not a lot on the weekly candle to go off of. You do have this resistance zone above that's in the high 160s, low 170s, which is right in line with that gap above as well, right around 171. So if we do break above these this previous close, definitely look for this resistance zone above to be an area where we may have some trouble getting through. Next one is Google. We will look at Google here in a great case study using the anchored VWAP. So one of the ways Brian teaches using the VWAPs is essentially anchoring from swing highs and swing lows. This is a great example here of, a nice reversal candle on the 14th. So on Tuesday, nice strong hammer. You had a reversal candle, just kind of a one-day impulse move up right to this swing high, swing low VWAP zone. And that's exactly where we rejected. So just a great case study using the VWAP and especially anchored VWAPs. So these are definitely anchored VWAPs. It's called anchored because you're starting it from a specific point. In this case, from the swing high and the swing low here, and it acted as a very big area of resistance on Thursday. Let's change that to red, not green, because we rejected here. But just a really good case study showing how price does respect these levels very well. On the weekly chart, you can see that we kind of just have this symmetrical triangle forming in this downtrend. So are we going to kind of have like a bear pennant with more downside? We'll have to see. At this point, we're just trading right in the middle of it. Not very actionable at all. Next one we'll look at is NVDA. NVIDIA is a great case study this week of gaps acting as resistance. So we had this gap above that was kind of my initial target this week. And we filled it almost to the cent here. And you can see that we rejected right off of it the last 3 days. And so this is just a great example that gaps a lot of the time do act as resistance or support, at least initially. And then if we can get a daily close above this area right around 230.75, then we could maybe be looking at the next gap above, which is up here in the 258 area. So, we do have a gap below at around 150, but we also have a gap that's a little closer than 150, and that's, as I mentioned, fills right around 258.50 or so. And once again, just the gap detector is a really great tool to use if you are trying to find those gaps quickly without having to search for them. So resistance for now, not a ton other than maybe this little support zone here that you've got, almost like a little bit of a pennant forming here. This would be kind of steep resistance, but you do have almost like this pennant forming on the daily chart, and definitely would be a bull pennant because you've got the initial flag pole, essentially this right here. This is your pole. Here's your pennant. And we'll see if we actually get some follow through to the upside and can get a close above that gap for possibly the next leg up. Now on the weekly chart, this has been something that is clearly showing some leadership in the market. So we've been anchoring the all-time high VWAP from the same spot for all these charts from the all-time highs. And notice here that NVIDIA actually is closing in, hitting new highs above this zone. Remember that we saw an IWM on SPY. We cannot get through this zone. So, NVIDIA is clearly leading the pack here, being above the all-time high VWAP zone, unlike, SPY, IWM, and a few other names. And same thing, right? We already broke above it. It wouldn't be shocking to see a little retest and continuation up. An SR flip, previous resistance becomes support or previous support becomes resistance. That's what an SR flip is. So if you follow me on Twitter, I talk about SR flips all the time. You can have them with anything. You can have them with VWAPs. You can have them with moving averages. It's essentially anything that has acted as and proved itself as resistance or support. Price breaks through it, and then you get a retest, and that kind of becomes the opposite of what it was. So do we get a pullback and retest this VWAP zone and continue up? That is to be determined, and we'll see what price action has for us next week. Next one is Tesla. Tesla's been just an absolute monster. We had a decent pullback on Thursday and Friday, but the bears weren't able to keep this down for too long. You'll see here that if we anchor the volume by price from the September highs here, you'll see that we have a lot of volume supporting price here. So you'll see that we pulled back down to the top of this volume shelf. We bounced off pretty nicely. And now, if we were to continue up and break Thursday's highs of around 218 or so, this area above anywhere from around 231 up to around 236 would be your target above. And a pretty solid candle here, nice piercing pattern candle here on the daily chart for the daily candle for Tesla. On the weekly chart, definitely an SR flip. So, we talk about it all the time. Here's a great example. Previous support. So if you want to follow my little arrow here, previous support from May and even a little further back. Yeah, so May 2022, you held support. You then retested it, held again as support back in October. We finally broke through it. So you can see here, if you follow my arrow, here's your support, broke down through it. Now, over the last 2 weeks, it has been acting as a resistance zone. So another one that we really need to keep an eye on to see if we can close right around, let's say, 220. Another thing that I would mention here is if you just use the volume by price tool and anchor this from the all-time highs, you do kind of have a lot of supply that we're trying to get through. So the more volume bars here, the more kind of friction that we're going to have to try to get through to the upside. If technically we could get through this volume gap, we could move pretty quickly right up to around 230, and then this is where you've got another area of kind of that break-even supply. Those shares that are now back to break-even. Some people may take everything off the table. Some people just may take half off the table. Regardless, it does make it a short-term resistance zone, at least initially, so the market can kind of get through all of those shares that are kind of being dumped or just lightened up on. So SR flip here, volume shelf looks pretty solid here on the daily. Path of least resistance is still up, very strong to the upside. Now, if we break below this volume shelf, let's call it the point of control right around 190, and we close below that, then that's when things get a little weird. But for now, we are above the volume shelf and a pretty strong candle for Friday. The last one that we'll touch on is Meta. And I have to say, Meta has got one of the most perfect falling wedges I've ever seen, possibly ever. I don't know. That's a bold statement. But essentially what you have here is you've got this huge earnings gap to the upside. You then have just this perfect falling wedge. You could call it a pennant. It just looks like a perfect falling wedge here. But same thing, right? You've got kind of your flagpole. Here's your pennant. And now the thought would be we break out and continue to the upside. Path of least resistance is definitely up here as well. It's been pretty crazy to see this one, move the way it has over the last couple months. Same thing here on the weekly chart where you kind of have pretty much kind of like an SR flip as well. So, if you just kind of pull this area across the previous support, and then we broke down, didn't even really act as resistance. So you didn't even really have an SR flip there. But it's interesting to see that now that we broke out through it, now we're retesting this area and possibly, this area could act as a nice support zone. If you anchor the volume by price from the all-time highs, you'll also see there's a lot of volume supporting price here, likely because you had a lot of price action here that was just chopping around within the zone. So needless to say, there is a lot of volume supporting price at this area. So it would be a little shocking to see price break down through this, but wouldn't be shocking necessarily to see a little more of a pullback to retest this area. This is the point of control. Point of control is simply just the largest volume node. So you can see here, that's your point of control. That's where the most volume has occurred within this 164 all the way up to around 170 area. And so that is the main area that I'll be watching to see if that holds. And that's all we've got. Please make sure to check out signalstack.com. It's our brand new order routing tool, completely owned by TrendSpider. It's not a third party or company or anything. SignalStack is its own website because you can use SignalStack with more than just TrendSpider. We didn't want people to think it was just something you use for TrendSpider. So check out signalstack.com. It's the same company, it's us. We're just branding it as SignalStack because you can use it on TradingView and other third-party platforms as well. It's not just a TrendSpider tool. So if you have any questions, let us know. If you do want to create a trading bot, just go to create a trading bot here, and you'll be able to go in and start kind of creating and automating your strategy from there. So any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the weekend update this weekend. Hopefully, you have a good, long 3-day weekend, and we'll see you on the next video in early March.